When you hear the word commandments, and especially you put another word with it, God's commandments, you automatically think of the 10 Commandments, don't you? I mean, it's just logical. You say commandments, God's commandments, the 10 pop into mind because they are heart and core, they are central to God's way of life. Now, I'm not going to deal with the 10 Commandments today as a package. But there is one commandment that I am going to deal with today. And since we are familiar with all 10, I would ask this question. Which is the most often broken commandment? Which commandment do you think is the most often broken? Now, I guess in one sense you couldn't say the Sabbath because 6 days of the week aren't the Sabbath. You can't break the Sabbath on those 6 days. Now, you could be classified in God's sight as a Sabbath breaker, continuously because you don't keep the Sabbath. But as far as the actual event of breaking it, obviously that would come on the seventh day, and that would be 52 times a year. So we'll just kind of leave that one out for consideration. We'll go to one which I do believe you can make a very strong argument for as being the most often broken commandment. And we find it in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 21. Deuteronomy 5 and verse 31. I said 31. It's 21. 21. Yeah. Some of you already got there, and you know. He mentioned the wrong verse. Okay, verse 21. Neither shall you desire your neighbor's wife, neither shall you covet your neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, or his maidservant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And of course, you got that word covet in there. And obviously, this is a commandment that simply speaks to covetousness. And I do believe you can make a very strong argument for number 10 as to it being the most often broken commandment, or certainly right up there at the top is one of the most often broken commandments. So I want to talk about the common casualty of covetousness. 'Tis the season to be covetous. But the season to be covetous does range year-long for that matter. It's just it has its high points. And I'm not going to talk about this season per se, but I had to throw that in because it is the season to be covetous. And I want to talk about the curse of covetousness. So if you want a title, here would be a good title for this message. Covetousness is a curse. Covetousness is a curse. The frenzy to get more and more and more. And of course, I grew up at a time when the frenzy to get more and more and more and to keep up with everybody else was called keeping up with the Joneses. And I don't know why the Joneses were put in that position, but anyhow, keeping up with the Joneses, that was just a phrase that was used to kind of speak to the fact that, well, he got a new car, I got to have one. He got a bigger house, I got to have a bigger house. He's in a better neighborhood, I got to be in a better neighborhood. She's got better clothes, I got to have better clothes. He got a promotion, I got to get a promotion. He's got more status, I got to get more status. It was just, and of course, it's not that the phrase itself may have kind of gone to the wayside, but what generated it hasn't. The frenzy to get more and more has become kind of a national epidemic. We talk about pandemics and epidemics and all, and we focus on these physical things, and properly so when we focus properly on them. But what about the spiritual viruses and the spiritual diseases and the spiritual things that are doing us in? The frenzy to get more and more. It is a human epidemic, and especially with nations that are known as the developed nations that have the world's greatest goods. And again, between Britain and the United States at the end of World War II, we possess 66% of the world's resources and wealth and all of that. Anyhow, all levels, all areas, from the top down to the grassroots, we find it. And it's almost like, well, if you can get it, or you can get away with it, go for it. You talk about credit cards. Now I realize you almost have to have a credit card. There are certain rentals you can't do, there's certain deposits you can't make, there's certain business arrangements, travel arrangements, etc., that you can't do if you don't have a credit card. So I'm not saying don't have a credit card. But one of the hardest things to control for people, especially since people aren't born with self-control, are credit cards. Well, I see that. Oh, I like that. Oh, if I had that, I'd be happier. That would make me a better person. That'd make me a happier person. I'd be more fulfilled. Oh, well, I don't have the cash in my purse or my billfold to get that. Oh, wait a minute. I got my credit card. I can actually leave here now with that. I can have that and leave with it, and I can pay later. And, of course, we know the trouble that so many get into with credit cards. One of the gurus of financial instructions and education is Dave Ramsey. And most of us have heard of Dave Ramsey. And he's got, Peace University and all. And he teaches about how to properly handle your finances, and he deals not just with the physical aspect and the financial aspect, but a lot of the motives and the emotions and the psychology that drives so much of it. And he has what he calls plastic surgery. You may have heard of it. He says, do your own personal plastic surgery. Take your credit cards and a pair of scissors and do plastic surgery on your cards and cut them up, because most people cannot handle the easy access, cannot control the credit cards. And I've actually known of a person or two, didn't know them personally, but known of them, who, well, let's see, the world is going to end by such and such time, I'm going to party. And they take their credit cards and they run up everything, they max them out, because they're not going to have to pay them off. Time's going to be up. The world's going to be over. Christ is going to be back here, and they're never going to have to pay off those credit cards. They're living it up. I don't know where they are right now, but they're definitely not living it up. No, go for it. You can have it, get it. And, of course, that's one area. Another area where you tend to see it, obviously, is in sports. Now, I grew up at a time when the sports teams, there was player loyalty. When I was growing up, somebody belonged to a team, their career started there, their career finished there usually. Probably 90-something% of them, I don't know what the percentage would be, but it would be the majority, they started with that team, and that's where they had their career. There was a team loyalty involved. Now, first of all, your athletes playing on teams, 90-something% have been involved with that sport since they were little bitty. And they're gifted, and they're talented, and they've worked hard, but they've had a good genetic base to work on too, work with. And they play the game because they love playing the game. But then again, you get into the big leagues and money comes into play, and team loyalties per se don't exist anymore in terms of money comes first. Who's going to pay me the most? And there is no doubt that Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs is one of the most talented quarterbacks who's ever gone on the field. No doubt about it. But I'm sorry, I cannot see paying a quarterback $500 million, which is $500 million, for 10 years. And it just keeps cranking up and cranking up and cranking up across the board. But money becomes too much, the name of the game. Covetousness has become a major business. You might say incorporated practically because it's so intrinsic to our lifestyles these days. And if it were a corporation, it could be named Greed Incorporated. That'd be a good name for it. See, think about it. This element of human nature, this element of carnality, it is understood. It is pushed by business and advertisers. If you go into marketing, you're going to have to take some courses in psychology. If you go into marketing, you're going to have to study how do people think, what moves them, what influences them, how do you manipulate them, how do you work it to get them to do what you want them to do. And psychology is a very big part of marketing and all. And again, it's understood and it's pushed by business and advertisers. You know, over the years, from time to time, I would get something in the mail that you have won a prize guaranteed. If you have the winning number, you'll win a bigger prize, but you've won a prize. And the envelope would usually be a see-through type envelope. It wouldn't be a security envelope. It'd be a kind of a see-through. You could go to a lamp and you could hold the envelope a certain way and see through it and see what number you had in there and see what it matched with. Oh, this says I've got a number in there that says I've won a color TV. Of course, obviously, if you open it and look at it, there's a catch there somewhere. But it's interesting. Marketers, business people, promoters in that way, and even with the gimmicks they do, sweepstakes, whatever, I had a man come to me one time and he said, it's a church member, he said, Mr. Beam, he said, I'm about to come into $1 million or so. He said, there's a piece of land down here that I own, and when I collect my money, I want to build us a church hall down there. Well, he never got his million. And I found out from someone else who was in the know that sadly, he was spending every dime of his Social Security check on these sweepstakes. They had hooked him in, pulled him in, and they were draining him dry, and they kept putting the bait out, and he kept taking it, and he literally was convinced that he was going to win $1 million, which again, he never saw. But they use something that comes natural to our own human nature to try and snare us. You know, we have another word we hear in this day and age called entrapment. If somebody approached me in the parking lot of Walmart, and that's a possibility because I do go to Walmart, and they said, hey man, and let's just say it was an undercover cop. Hey man, I got some good stuff here. You want some? Why not? It's good stuff. So? You don't want it? Oh boy, this make you feel great. I wouldn't know. I've never done it. Not interested. And I walk away. But now, if I was a user, if I was looking for opportunity, then I could be trapped. And they would call it entrapment. But see, here's the thing. They're utilizing the person's own lust to entrap them. And if you don't have that lust, or you've conquered that lust, they can't trap you. They can't entrap you. But anyhow, they understand this about human nature, the greed factor, the covetous factor, and they do whatever they can to magnify it. And of course, God absolutely understands how, you might say, germane it is to human nature as pushed and promoted by Satan and his society. And he has a commandment that talks about just don't covet. just don't covet. Learn to live in a way that you don't covet. But go back to marketers and business and promoters. They trust in it as a motivator. They trust in it as a tool. And they see the results. It works. It works. I actually heard a man one time say, it's on talk radio, he was calling in to the talk radio host, and actually heard the man say, he said, greed will give us the answers. He believed what he was saying. Greed will give us the answers. It's a force, and it's a power, and it's a motivator, and it's a tool that many believe in and that they will use. And again, opportunities will definitely take advantage of it. And it definitely becomes a snare in more ways than one. See, coveting always, no exception. Coveting always plants a God between you and the true God. That's why it's called idolatry. Notice Colossians 3 and verse 5. Colossians 3 and verse 5. Coveting always plants a God between you and the true God. Colossians 3, verse 5. Mortify, just old King James word that means kill. Kill, therefore, neutralize, make void, mortify, therefore, your members which are upon the earth. And then it defines very specifically what it is we're supposed to shut down. Neutralize, kill, get away from, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Covetousness, which is idolatry. Coveting always plants a God between you and the true God, and that's why it is called idolatry. Coveting causes something to come to mean more to you than God, or His ways, or His principles. And with that thought in mind, I think of Matthew 6:21. Matthew 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6 and verse 21. Now, we read it this way in Scripture, for where your treasure is. You want to know where somebody's heart is? Well, look to see what their treasure is. What is their treasure? What do they treasure? For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's where you will find their heart. Whatever they treasure, that's where you will find their heart. I can also put it this way. What you make your treasure will capture your heart. What you make your treasure will capture your heart. And it becomes a God unto you instead of the real God. Now, I'm one of these folks who always tries to remember that God's perspective is complete and comprehensive. You know, I could pick up a book and open it up to the middle, a book I've never read, especially a novel, and I wouldn't know for sure what's going on because I wouldn't know what's happening in the first half of the book. I could walk in the middle of a movie that I haven't seen, and I wouldn't know all that's gone before, so I wouldn't have the fullest idea of what's going on. God never opens the book in the middle. God never walks into the movie in the middle. God's perspective never breaks in at the middle of things. He always sees from square one forward, from ground zero. He has a complete and a thorough overview from the very beginning. And if you want to talk about any of the breakage of these commandments, and specifically number 10, see, at Sinai, they were only codified. They've existed, really, always, if you understand them. They were codified at Sinai. They didn't come into existence at Sinai. But see, number 10, God had experience with that long before there was ever a human being. And if we go back to Ezekiel 28, verse 16, there's a word in there that's always caught my attention. Ezekiel 28 and verse 16. Now, this goes back and is speaking by God through Ezekiel of the covering cherub, the super angel, Lucifer. Verse 14, you are the anointed cherub that covers. And he acknowledges that, in verse 15, that you were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created. He wasn't created as a devil. He became a devil. There's a difference. He became. Till iniquity was found in you. And that iniquity that was found in him, and of course it had a wide range, yes. But in verse 16, this word here has always caught my attention. By the multitude. Excess, beyond all proper proportion, whatever, the multitude, the mass amount of, the multitude of your merchandise. They have filled the midst of you with violence, and you have sinned. Obviously, with what he was doing and what he was trying to generate, evidently with maybe the entire angelic realm, but certainly succeeded with a third, one of the things that he would have helped promote into play to become part of them would be covetousness. And I think about, the time we're in, the 'tis the season to be covetous, the multitude of merchandise, the multitude of stuff that's going on, the multitude. It's interesting. It's interesting that word is put in there. By the multitude of your merchandise, they fill the midst of you with violence, and you've sinned. See, covetousness feeds covetousness. Covetousness feeds covetousness. It doesn't have an automatic ceiling on it. It keeps climbing in its magnitude. Isaiah 14. Verses 13 and 14. And Lucifer has become the supreme expert in covetousness and how to work it and magnify it in human beings. Anyway, in Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14, it really, you think about it, it speaks to covetousness here. We think about power and throne. Well, do we ever know anybody that covets power? Do we ever know anybody that covets to have power and rulership? For you have said, verse 13, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne. Where did he get a throne? God. God gave him a throne. And he still sits on that throne today. He sits on the throne of the earth. He sits on the throne of the earth as the God of this world. He'll be removed someday, but he won't be removed until Jesus Christ returns. He has a throne. That's power. That's a certain amount of authority. And should have been an opportunity to do good, which he totally corrupted. But it is interesting. He said, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation and the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be, and it be better rendered, I will be the Most High. In other words, covetous, his throne wasn't enough. He wanted God's throne. The throne over all existence, the throne over the whole universe, the throne over everything that there is, period, is so far beyond the throne over the earth only. He coveted God's throne. And as much as anything, covetousness corrupted him and ruined him. 2 Timothy 3 and verse 2. 2 Timothy 3 and verse 2. In 2 Timothy 3 and verse 2 it says, for men shall be lovers of their own selves. One of the fastest growing spiritual diseases of our time is narcissism. We are raising a whole generation of narcissists, although there's plenty of narcissists sprinkled throughout all age brackets. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. Notice what immediately follows with that statement. Covetous. Boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. Think about that. Lovers of their own selves, covetous. The two go together. They go naturally together. Verse 4. Verse 4. Traitors, heady, high-minded, notice, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. Their pleasures become their God. Lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. The pleasures supersede God. The pleasures become their God. Again, that is idolatry. What is planted before God, between you and God, becomes your God, and it's a form of idolatry. Keep your finger here, I will come back. But in Psalm 10, verse 3, I'm coming back to 2 Timothy, but in Psalm chapter 10 and verse 3, it reads this way in the King James, "For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire, and blesses the covetous whom the Lord abhors." Now, the way it could read in the Hebrew is this way. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire, and the covetous blesses himself. He abhors the Lord. He blesses himself. He abhors the Lord. Back in 2 Timothy 3, and this time verse 1, it says, "This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come." Covetousness, as much as anything, helps produce such conditions of covetous times because, first and foremost, you look out for yourself and what you want. And good old number one gets taken care of regardless of what it may cost others. Again, I think of Lucifer, and I think about Lucifer's covetousness produced universal perilous times. You know, you have a shooter in your neighborhood, he can very rapidly produce, or in the school that your kid goes to, that shooter can very quickly produce perilous times right there in a small area. But Lucifer's covetousness produced universal perilous times. Covetousness, greed cost Lucifer and a third of the angels. Here's what it cost them. It cost them their eternal happiness and their eternal well-being. Years ago, one of those angels, fallen angels, now known as demons, that fell prey to Lucifer's influence and fell in line with him, made this statement. I said it cost them their eternal happiness and well-being. That angel, that fallen angel said, quote, "There is no coming back, never, for all eternity." In the wilds, there's a little particular monkey, and I forget the name of it, but there's this little monkey that is many times captured and, at least in times past, was used. It could be for zoos, pets, experiments, trial experiments on them. But what's interesting about this little monkey is the way that they would capture them. Very simple. They'd go out to the jungle, the trees, and they'd take an auger. And they would drill a hole into the tree trunk, the right level. It didn't really matter where they did it, but it could be close to the ground where they could just stand and drill a hole. but they would drill a hole in just so far, and then at the end of that little tunnel, they would hollow it out just so much. But they would make the hole just big enough that these little monkeys could stick their hand into the tunnel, through the tunnel, to that little hollowed out area. And the reason the little monkey would want to stick its hand in there is because they'd put a little piece of tin foil, shiny object, or a peanut or something in that little hollowed out area. So the little monkey would reach its hand in, which would go in because of just the right size, and it would grab whatever was in there that it wanted, and now it can't pull its fist back out because the tunnel is too narrow. And then the trappers, the hunters, would come, and it would see them coming, and it would dance all around that hole, all the way around, screaming and carrying on, and they'd walk right up and catch it because it wouldn't turn loose of whatever was in there. All they had to do was just let go of whatever it had, pull its hand back out, and scamper up the tree, and it's safe. But greed trapped the little monkey. Nothing else. There was no part of the trap that could hold it except the little monkey's own little monkey greed to have whatever it had a hold of. And when I first found out about that many years ago, I thought how that greed and covetousness can make a monkey out of any one of us if we let it. Proverbs 1 in verse 19. Proverbs 1 in verse 19. And again, young man, young woman, old man, old woman, middle-aged man, middle-aged woman, who wants to be smarter and get smarter. Read in Proverbs a lot and meditate on what you read there and incorporate it into your living. Chapter 1, verse 19. So are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, greedy of gain, which takes away the life of the owners thereof. The little monkey wound up as a captive because he wanted whatever, and it might just be a little piece of tinfoil. He wanted that so bad, he would not turn it loose and free himself. Greedy of gain, which takes away the life of the owners thereof. And I look at Proverbs 15:27, Proverbs 15 and verse 27. He that is greedy of gain troubles his own house. Charlie, what is that sitting in the driveway out there? Well, I picked it up down at the Ford dealership. Charlie, you know we can't afford that. And we just got the other one paid off. And by the way, where is it? Well, I traded it in. Charlie, we've got medical bills to pay. We've got braces to put on our child. Why? Why did you incur that debt and that payment? We were, as of last month, we were free of payments. Why? Well, you know, my cousin so-and-so got one, and, you know, I got this bit of a promotion at the job, and, you know, it just looks better if I'm totally right up to style with everything, you know. Troubles his own house. He that is greedy of gain troubles his own house. Think that doesn't happen? I've had to deal with situations like that with folks. It's troubles his own house. Go with me to Genesis 13. Troubles his own house. Genesis 13 and verses 5 through 13, and I'll read through it quickly. 13 beginning in verse 5. And Lot, nephew to Abraham, of course, Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. They were together. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. They just had too much livestock, not enough pasturage. Got to do a little bit of, we got to work something out here. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled then in the land. They were still there. And Abram said to Lot, he took the initiative, let there be no strife, I pray you, between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, because we're brethren, we're kinfolk, uncle and nephew. Is not the whole land before you? Look, I will defer to you, Lot. I give you the choice. Separate yourself, I pray you, from me. If you will take the left, if you go to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you depart to the right, I'll go to the left. He gave Lot the choice. And look at how Lot made the choice. Lot lifted up his eyes. Now keep something in mind. When you read about the patriarchs and others, they were not always converted to begin with when you're first reading about them. A lot of the conversion had to come through some hard lessons and hard learnings over time. Anyway, Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. There were springs, streams, and there was the Jordan River, well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's how well watered it was, even as the garden of the Lord, Garden of Eden. Even like that. And like the land of Egypt. That part along the Nile and also Goshen. Like the land of Egypt as you come into Zoar. It'd be a lot easier to make a living down there. It'd be a lot easier to increase my flocks. It'd be a whole lot easier just having it easier. And the opportunity to increase would obviously be better pasturage and all of that. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. Lot took the best, and he knew it was the best. And he wanted the best instead of the worst. And it was his choice because of Abram's greater maturity and spirituality. And so he wanted the better, and he took the better, took the best of the two. But notice verse 13, there was a price to pay. He that is greedy of gain troubles his own house. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. What happened on down the way? See, not everything comes up and hits you in the face that very day or that next week or that next month or that next year or maybe even that next decade. But what happened? The time came that when he had to get out and leave and the angels were hurrying him out of there, he only left there with his wife, who wound up turning around and turning into a pillar of salt, so he lost her too. He only wound up leaving with his wife, who he lost very shortly outside, and his two unmarried daughters. He left his married daughters, and doesn't say how many there were, doesn't give a number, but it says plural. He left his married daughters and sons-in-law and whatever grandchildren in that place that got burned up, got incinerated. Did his choice cost him down the way, trouble his house? It destroyed all of his house. except for himself and the two unmarried daughters. Covetousness desensitizes. I remember a neighbor who lived about a mile from us on the country road, the gravel road that I grew up on. I remember a neighbor about a mile from us who his health was really bad, and he supplemented some meager income with doing a little bit of trapping as he was able. And time came that he took a bad spell and he died. On the day of his funeral, when he was being put 6 feet under in the little country cemetery about a mile and a half from where he had lived, because it was known that he was being buried and that all family and friends were over there at the cemetery, someone or several someones broke into his sheds, took all of his furs, took all of his traps, took all of his equipment and some other stuff. Covetousness desensitizes. We live in a day and a time when people are very sensitive to what they want and they're very insensitive to what others need. Again, those scriptures we read in 2 Timothy 3 about lovers of self and lovers of pleasure. And when you think about covetousness, if you put certain definitions on it in one sense, you could say, well, it's inordinate desire. You could say it's excessive desire. You could say it's illegal desire. You could say it's unlawful desire. It's rot of the mind. It's rot of the spirit. It's ruin of the character. And it can literally become a consuming fire in the fiber. And it all leads to the tyranny of things. You know, things themselves are not wrong. I know, surely we all realize that. Abraham had a lot of things. Job had a lot of things. Solomon had a lot of things. In fact, Solomon didn't ask for a lot of things. He just asked for God to give him the wisdom to know how to conduct himself with God's people, how to properly judge and properly rule and all of that. And God was very pleased with that and said, because you've not asked for yourself riches and all of that, I'm going to give you riches and such. And the riches weren't the problem. The things, the riches, weren't the problem with Abraham. They weren't the problem with Job. They weren't the problem with Solomon. Those were not problems to them because they kept them in their proper positioning in their lives and thinking. I've heard that phrase for a long time over the years, the tyranny of things. Things come on you. And what a person realizes after a while is that things don't make you happy. They don't. And they should never be viewed as something that can make you happy. They should be viewed as resources to be properly used. But here's the thing. Things don't make a person happy, but the person who is motivated by the covetousness never seems to realize that. Well, if I could just get that, oh, I'd be so happy if I could have that. Oh, I'd be so happy if I could, whatever it might be. I'd be satisfied. I'd really be happy. And they don't realize that in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10, there is a reality that works because it's a reality. And it can be known or not known, but it is a reality. And since it is a reality, it's good to realize that and not fall prey to that reality. Ecclesiastes 5:10, he that loves silver. Abraham did not love silver. He had plenty of silver, but he was not a lover of silver. He that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver. There's a principle here. Nor he that loves abundance with increase. Not going to satisfy. It's kind of like the guy with the barn. And his harvest filled up the barn and more. And he said, well, I know what I'll do. Instead of thinking in terms of a giving type mindset because of the great blessings God gave him, no, I know what I'll do. I can't get all of my stuff in my barn, so what I'll do is I'll build another barn, a second barn, and a bigger barn, and then I can get more stuff in it. It fits that category of he that loves abundance. He that loves abundance. It won't matter how much increase there is, it will never, ever truly be enough. It's kind of like hoarders. Those who hoard, it doesn't matter how big their hoard gets. They thrive on hoarding. Got to have more. Got to have more. But it is a principle that he that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loves abundance with the increase. And again, I think about Satan. He was given power. He was given a throne. But he himself became so self-generated, he made himself a lover of himself, and he became covetous, and it came the time that no measure of power or throne was going to satisfy except he had the number one, top one of all existence. If eyes are constantly upon getting more and more, they won't appreciate and enjoy what they do have. It'll make one dissatisfied with what they do have, and it will remove joy and satisfaction and thankfulness. And one motivated that way will never be able to have all that they want or could want. And, there's certain realities that part of our spiritual maturity is just certain realities, spiritual things, learning to understand them and live with them properly. And if we don't, in this case, the reason it's called tyranny of things is because it comes to own us. I remember the words of an old black gentleman many years ago. The exact words of this old black gentleman. He said, some men ain't got much and don't need no more. Others got everything and it ain't enough. I think that's worth repeating. Some men ain't got much and don't need no more. Others got everything and it ain't enough. And most importantly, I remember the words of God. Hebrews 13:5. You have to understand, again, to the degree that we can, where we can, the context of statements in the Bible, because that can add extra impact. When Hebrews was written, Paul knew that what they had known as their way of life was going to be shattered in just a few years. And they were going to lose things. They were going to lose the temple. They were going to lose their homes. They were going to lose things. And I guess in a sense, part of the reason for writing Hebrews was to help God's church, to help God's church get things in proper order. And so here in chapter 13, as the letter is being wrapped up, he says, let your conduct, as it should be rendered, your lifestyle, when it says your conversation, King James, it means conduct or lifestyle. Let your lifestyle be without covetousness, because that's always a killer. It's always a curse. Be content with such things as you have. Very important. And obviously, I'm not going to turn back to Philippians 4:11, but the Apostle Paul, in making the statement in Philippians 4, verse 11, in whatsoever state I find myself to be content, he learned how to make himself content. See, this 10th commandment is so important because God is getting ready to stock his kingdom. I don't know when the resurrection is going to be. Well, yeah, I do too. I don't know the date. But the resurrection is going to be when Christ returns. It's going to be at the 7th trumpet. So we do know. We just don't know the time on it, the date on it. But whenever that time comes, if it should be 5 years or 50 years from now, whenever it comes, at the seventh trumpet, a whole spiritual class of people called firstfruits will rise, some from the grave, some from off this side of the grass, and they're immediately the ground floor stocking the kingdom as assistants to Jesus Christ. God is getting ready to stock his kingdom. And it doesn't occur, the preparation of the stock for stocking it doesn't occur at the resurrection. That's when we're transformed into the glorious beings to rule with Christ. But all the preparations of preparing the stock for the kingdom, so to speak, takes place now, during these days, these weeks, these months, these years. And he's only going to do it with those who have learned certain lessons. And one of them is this that you find in Luke 12:15. Luke 12 and verse 15. Luke 12, verse 15. And he said to them, Christ said to them, take heed. And he warns them, just like he warns me, he warns you, he warns all of us. Take heed and beware, be vigilant against covetousness. For, or that is because, a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. That's not where your life really is, in the abundance of the things which we possess. Ephesians 5 and verse 5 in Ephesians 5 and verse 5, Paul wrote, now I said, God's government will not be placed in the hands of coveters. In Ephesians 5:5, for this you know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater. Once again, it identifies that coveting is idolatry. Nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Judas was a type. Now, I don't have any problem understanding, at least from what I read and know, that Judas to be in the general resurrection. He was never truly called or converted in this age, but he fit a role that had to be fulfilled. But also in that he became a type. Judas was a type. He lost his place. He lost his place. Verse 5, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ. An idolater, a covetous man, one and the same, they lose their place. And Judas was covetous. He was a thief. Scripture identifies him as a thief. And he was the one that carried the money bag. We're not told, but you can be assured there were times he reached his hand into the bag because he was covetous. God's government will not be placed in the hands of coveters. When Jethro went to Moses, he says, Moses, you're going to wear yourself out. He said, these long lines, it's beyond your time and energy to meet all the needs. You need to appoint men who can hear at different levels, who can hear cases. And the ones they can't handle, they'll pass them on up. And you'll get the ones that can't be handled, but you've got to have help. You've got to choose able men. Now, you'd find this, I'm not going to go back there, but you would find this in Exodus 18 and verse 21. In Exodus 18 and verse 21, he's told, choose able men, men of ability. And one of the things that was a qualifier was hating covetousness. They have to be men who hate covetousness, so they don't fall prey to it. And when it comes to Timothy, as Paul said, Timothy, in ordaining somebody, and you find this in 1 Timothy 3:3, he said, who's not covetous. They can't be covetous. Kings and priests, kingdom of God. Every one of us that is resurrected, when that time comes, there will not be a covetous man or woman in the entire group. That will all be processed away during this time of our training. You know, brethren, as we live and apply the principles of God, please enjoy what He gives you. I enjoy what He gives me. I look at the blessings that God has given me. They can be blessings of loved ones. They can be blessings of physical surroundings. They can be blessings of property. They can be blessings of vehicles. They can be blessings of His creation around me, blessings of my eyesight. I mean, whatever blessings. Blessings of food, clothing, and shelter. Enjoy what He gives us. And always be content to have our increase. It's not that increase is wrong by any means. But having our increase the proper way, at the proper time, and not getting caught up in covetousness, because when you do, you're caught up in the curse of covetousness, and we don't want to be a casualty of covetousness, because covetousness is a curse.